how has the industry changed since you kind of started and entered into it, and where do you think it is going?
It's going to change significantly in the next couple of years. I think the technology from the sensors collecting data is going to explode. I think it's going to be every data point that could possibly be collected is going to be collected by someone. So the people that can make it one solution are going to be successful. The people that concentrates on silos are going to have only one piece of the puzzle, which is they're probably going to lose it over time.
Welcome to the Spatialedge Industry Insights podcast. I'm your host, Pierre, Roux, and today with me we've got a very special guest. So she heads up, she's the head of the Pepkor data analytics team, building out very interesting analytics, machine learning models, and products for the Pepkor organization, who's one of the biggest clothing and merchandise retailers in Africa, with over 5,000 stores and more than 64 billion rand in annual revenue. So my guest's name today is Venette De Villiers.
Yeah.
Van Zyl De Villiers. Venette Van Zyl De Villiers. And so Venette, I actually did a little bit of digging as well. So we've had a few conversations in the past, and you've told me a little bit about your history, but also went on your LinkedIn page just to have a look. So it has been quite interesting, I guess, the journey that you followed. And it looks quite early on you also became the head of analytics at RCS. But I want you to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and then kind of how your journey went into the world of analytics.
All right. So thanks, Pierre. Thanks for inviting me to the session. So I studied at the University of Pretoria, so let's go far back. Studied econometrics, which is economics and statistics. And after that, I decided to leave for the UK, and I worked there for 3 years. I worked in a management consultancy, and the main responsibilities that we had was to go to developing countries in a system to export their products to the EU and the US. Majority of work was done for the World Bank, a very interesting part of my life, very much more focus on economics and data, very different from where I am today. After 3 years, I left the UK and went traveling for a year. I will not expand on that right now. We can have a discussion around that a little bit later. And then came back to South Africa to join Woolworths Financial Services in Cape Town. Stayed there for 5 years, and that's really where we developed a lot of models, early models at that point, much more linear than what it is today, a lot more machine learning. But it was probably one of the first areas where the whole credit decisioning was fully automated into an early machine learning model where customers was assessed not by a person to understand if they qualify for risk or not, or for credit or not. They were assessed by data and historical data predicting the future. Interesting journey, that's a lot of initial effort in convincing people that these models are better than what the human decisions would be. So that was a very different journey in itself. And after that, I left Woolworths to go to Capitec, stayed there for a period of time to look after their data analytics, particularly in the risk area. It was really starting up of the analytics area in risk specifically. From there, I went to RCS and started the analytics function there, so head of data analytics at RCS. Also looked after products. At that point, I looked after the loan product. Sure, obviously got a lot of years behind me. From there, I went to PIC, which now is Principia, which is a consultancy doing a lot of modeling for particularly the retailers in the credit risk space, and worked with TFG, worked with Truworths, worked with Woolworths again, and many of the banks. And from there I left and joined Pepkor, which is where I'm at today.
Sure, that is a fascinating and interesting journey. I think there's a few key things that stood out to me, which are quite enjoyed and found interesting, and probably translated a little bit as well throughout your journey and into your later life. One of them was convincing people at the time, and this is quite a while back now when you were at Woolworths, that this, because I'm assuming back then there also wasn't, I mean, there probably wasn't anything else like it, that this model is worth building and using and automating, and it actually can perform better than human counterparts.
Yes. Yeah.
It
was an interesting journey. We did a lot of convincing, getting people to test their own opinion versus the model. And obviously it takes time that you have to measure it over time and prove that the model is actually better. But a couple of months later, most of the retailers implemented that as an automated decisioning system. So.
They followed suit.
Yes.
And then obviously the other interesting thing that stood out to me was that you went to RCS and you kind of started that unit or got it off the ground, which also feels to me a lot similar to what happened at Pepkor with the data analytics, where getting it off the ground and starting it and making it work. So in some way, you sound actually very entrepreneurial, like getting things going, getting it sorted out, and within these organizations.
Yes, yeah. So in Pepkor, the idea actually came from Pierre, which is our current CEO, and he saw the value of data and decided to start a data analytics area. Main function at that point was to bring the data into a central space for analytics. And when I joined 2 years later, the main function changed a little bit into bringing in the machine learning and the AI, which is what we're still driving quite hard today.
Oh, fascinating. So I guess one of the questions here is, it sounds like from econometrics to analytics, a lot of it in the financial space, a lot of it in the credit space, but also then getting a lot of exposure to retailers and retail world and such. So I guess one of my questions is, going from a focus on econometrics to getting into the industry, I don't know if you can remember, or if it's very too long ago, but how difficult is that kind of transition to kind of get to know an industry, to be able to really contribute to it?
Yeah, I think the environment was very different then than what it is now. I'm actually quite jealous of the new machine learning specialists and data scientists coming through today, because the opportunity to implement whatever you learn is there. In my era, it was very much you had to invest in a specific tool, like a SAS tool was a very popular one, to be able to implement these modeling. And a lot of the small companies didn't have money to invest in it. So a lot of the trained data scientists didn't really get into the industry. As such, it developed into more reporting type of functionality and ad hoc analytics type of functionality, while today it's really becoming part of the operational process. So it's moving the back office to the front office. So yes, I think that's been a major change from then till now. Getting to know an industry, I think it takes a long time. Getting to be an expert in either credit or retail takes a lot of time. We spend a lot of time with people that are experts to be able to augment what we know from data science with the retail flavor. And we believe that works very well. Without the SMEs, without the subject matter experts, I don't believe we would have been where we are today in this short space of time.
100% agree with that, because they are experts within their own domains, and even though you let's say you've built up experience, or you've been in the industry for a very long time, they're still dealing with today's challenges and the market of today, and you still need them, you still need those insights. And even though you're then coming with, look, we are the experts with data science and we know how to build a model and everything. I agree 100%. Without that input, it's, I won't say impossible, but it's the likelihood is a lot less that you can build something successful for today's market.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
There was a very good leader in Pepkor that always said, what problem of the customer do you want to solve? If you can't answer that, then you don't really have a role to play. And I think it's very true. In anything that we do, the first question is, what problem of the customer are we trying to solve? Whether that's our actual customer purchasing in store, or whether it's the customer we deliver our models to. If you don't have those good problems to solve, you can't really deliver anything. You can't really change the world. You can't add value to anyone.
That's a great starting point. I love it because 100%. I'm trying to think of like a opposite example here. But if you don't, for example, if you don't have that question of what am I trying, what am I helping with for this person, then the question is, well, what are you doing? You're not helping anyone with anything.
Exactly.
So that's a great way. That's a great way to put it.
And it's only the real retailers in a retail. If you want to solve a retail problem, it's the retailers that know what are the problems that need to be solved. So it's so critical to spend a lot of time with them and get an understanding of what that is in order to know what can we offer that can assist
Help
that world.
them and deal with it and help them solve the
Yes.
problems. So, and kind of a slightly different question. What does it mean to be the head of a department or to be the head of data and analytics, or to, I guess, champion it and grow it out and build it out?
I think we're getting a lot of grey hair. One of the things. Yeah, so as part of the Pepkor DNA team, we are responsible for many retailers. As you know, there's many retailers in the stable. There's Ackermans, there's Pep, and then the whole Spatialedge group, which is Refinery and Duns and Shoe City, Tacky Town and Code and SPCC. And as a central function, our main responsibility is to look after all the data analytics for the group. It sort of veered off in two different areas. So the one piece is moving into the advanced analytics, which is driving the augmentation of decisioning, but also the automation of decisioning. So it's moving from descriptive into much more of a predictive and eventually a prescriptive nature. But the second portion that's becoming much more important over time is giving the people that use the data, so the retailers in the businesses, the people that's looking after the credit, to give them the empowerment to make their own decisions. So in delivering products that they can make decisions on is becoming absolutely critical. And without that, you don't really become the DNA of the business. You don't become part of the fiber of the business. So it's really those two components. It's solving the really interesting, complex problems through maths and stats, but it's also enabling the business, to giving them a tool that they can use to make their own decisions.
That one part you said, being part of the DNA of the business. Sorry, it's just Pepkor DNA, data analytics. Brilliant. No, 100%. I completely agree with augmentation, automation, with empowering the retailers and giving them the tools so that they can use it. And that's that's in essence a way to push the company forward and to move the company forward. But I'm still quite curious to hear kind of what kind of it means for you. What kind of it means to be the head of driving this whole thing.
Sure, I'm not sure what you're expecting.
No, just like kind of maybe the question. Okay, maybe if I can rephrase the question. So almost as a data scientist, or
Yes.
your kind of role in the organization is you need to focus on building out models for a specific customer. As you mentioned, there's got a specific problem, build the models, and there's a whole process around that, gathering information, understanding it, doing exploration. And then when you become kind of a lead data scientist, it's not just you who executing on the work that's important anymore. It's now your influence on the team and getting the team to perform and execute. Now, there's now maybe a lot of assumptions and then perception, but then for me, then the head of being the data analytics of an organization means the bigger initiatives, putting together all the blokkies or the little English, the little puzzle pieces that will enable whatever the vision is or whatever the agenda is, and also probably setting that vision and agenda. And then I'm assuming a lot of firefighting in between in terms of driving the process. That's kind of my assumption. If that's kind of correct, or
for sure. So obviously, as any leader in any position, you need to drive the strategy, which is the obvious one. I think for us, it's a little bit different. We're a central function. Every business has got their own strategies that they drive. So I guess our challenge has been to fit a strategy to all the different retailers, which means you need to chop and change continuously. We have moved in a little bit of a different direction in saying there needs to be only one strategy. Every retailer has a couple of pain points that they need to solve, but they're not all on the same data journeys. So for us, we try to pick the most valuable projects in the whole roadmap that we've put down, and those are the things we'll tackle at a group level and deliver something for the group, which obviously we're a small team, so we need to get the most out of our small team that we possibly can. And in that, support the business strategy as well. I think the team that I have at the moment is quite incredible. It's a combination of very many different skills. So I'm not an expert in any of the areas anymore, but we've got a very nice setup. We've got a data engineering team, so they particularly looking after the data pipelines and making sure the data coming from the operational systems are incorporated into an area, and I'll talk about the technology a little bit later, but incorporated into an area that is robust and the data can be tracked and measured and alerts are in place to make sure everything is correct. Their main function is, however, to support the data scientists. So the pipelines that they build is not for operational reporting necessarily, although it can be used for that. It's mainly supporting the data science projects that comes out. So that's the one component. Second component is data science, which is a group of very highly educated people looking after an area and solving really complex problems. And the third area is our machine learning engineering. So it's taking those models and making it robust in the pipelines and delivering it in a way that can be trusted and reliable, that we know when the models doesn't function the way it should function, that those alerts are in place to do the rebuild and so on and so forth. So I think getting back to your original question, there's two roadmaps that runs in parallel. The one is how you set up and grow your team and build that competency of excited but skilled and different skills in one specific area. And the second portion is the driver of the strategy across the various groups in terms of what problems are you going to tackle, which problems are you going to solve, which issues is most important. We've got a very nice roadmap on our whole picture and the flow of things. And as we identify pieces of value, those pieces of puzzles, as you call it, is being colored in. But we are also very cognizant to build out from a specific piece. So if you build a specific model and you know there's other models that could potentially feed and grow on that, that's where we'll typically try and concentrate first, because then you'll get the best value for your money.
100%. So you'll essentially be able to solve one, or well, not just one, but a more generic version of the solution, and then be able to roll it out, deploy it, or have a lot of all the other companies involved and so forth.
Exactly.
Better use the resources available to address all the problems of the group.
Exactly.
So with all these projects happening, there's been a few different kinds of projects. What would you say is your favorite or the biggest win, or maybe biggest 1 or 2, 3 wins that you've thought it's like, this was epic to date, and then kind of just take us through it?
I think there's quite a few that I can mention. I think we've talked about this before, but the markdown optimization is definitely one of our favorites. It was our first really big retail project, and we learned a whole lot of lessons in that space. So the first lesson that we learned, for instance, is we're very excited to solve problems, but if the data isn't right, you don't solve anything. So unfortunately, a lot of people study data science and machine learning, and it's very exciting because you only get the perfect data set, and you can do some fascinating, amazing things with it, and you deliver something that can really change the business. But they don't always tell you about all the work that goes into the data that goes into this model that you need to put together. And that's where a lot of the work sits. The second thing, I guess the second lesson that we had is that if you try to deliver a machine learning model making all the decisions for the end user and make them feel like their 20 years of experience is going to be replaced by something or someone without any background or experience, it firstly creates a lot of angst, because the model needs to be very reliable, and the person working with it knows it inside and out, and they know what its weaknesses and strengths are. If you replace that with an automated model, it creates angst, it creates uncertainty, it creates resistance. So we took a step back from that journey, and we said the best thing you can do in AI and machine learning is to augment people, not to replace them. And I think the first model we delivered was there for the planners to use and make better decisioning, and they could decide when they want to use it and when they don't want to use it. As soon as the planners realize that it's much easier to use the system to make decisions, which is very similar to their own decisioning, they tend to adopt it a lot easier. That saves them a whole lot of time, and they get to concentrate on strategy instead of execution of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final step is once you've got that adoption of the model, then the automated decisioning becomes a lot more easier to implement. But now the person deals with exceptions, because there will always be outliers. We can't always assume that things will work perfectly. There's always strange nuances within the data that you need to pick up and you need to deal with. So I guess the people element has been absolutely critical, and that is probably the biggest things that I believe people should concentrate on. It's the person component, not necessarily the modeling. That's actually the easy part.
That's fascinating. So I 100% agree with everything. And then expanding on that, also just maybe adding a bit more context as well. So when you were saying it, I was thinking of just dealing with them and helping them understand it. And if I remember correctly, beforehand, I mean, there's thousands of different products, thousands of different SKUs. So they can never actually get to everything. They had to literally pick a subset, and whatever biases were involved in picking that subset, I don't know, but they had to find a way, pick a subset, focused on that, give the recommendations to the stores, let them execute. Now suddenly there's a model that can take into account all the data, take into account the forecast, optimize on top of it, and then present them with a list. And they can use that and then obviously distribute the recommendations. But now suddenly there's the ability to, oh, I didn't know we actually wanted to mark down socks, or whatever it may be. Like, it might not have been a thing in the past, but now, hey, let's do this. Execute it, and then actually realize, hey, there's been a treasure trove of potential opportunities here that we were never aware of in the past. So that with me is pretty epic. And then, yes, 100% getting people to, that's again to the earlier point you mentioned, trust the system and trust the outcomes and trust that it's going to help them and aid them rather than replace or, I guess, worsen the situation.
Yeah.
Those are things that the key things there.
Yeah, and I think the benefits we got out of it was vast. As you said, there's lots of opportunities that was identified that wasn't identified before. Efficiencies improved quite significantly. And people concentrate on the right things, not on the wrong things. They concentrate on the strategy. They concentrate to the next step. But I think the most exciting thing for me was the way these models start combining. So you had the original, just the forecasting model per SKU. Then you moved over to the price elasticity piece, and then you move over to the optimization. And that obviously saves a whole lot of, well, it actually adds a whole lot of potential profit to the business.
Yes.
Right? Because you do everything that a machine can see that a human can't necessarily identify.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's been a real nice journey. And the thing that it exposed to us is once you get to the forecasting piece, there's a demand forecasting that can be applicable in so many different ways. So it changes one model to potentially many use cases. And that's something that's opened up the lid for us on where we want to take this.
Is there any other projects that you also would like to highlight, as this was a pretty great project?
Sure, we've dealt with so many different areas. So one of the areas we're dealing with is the supply chain. So we've done a lot of work in looking at activity-based costing and apply some efficiencies on reducing the cost and getting the product into store a lot quicker and a lot easier. That's one of the big wins that we have. Again, we look at the forecasting model that comes into play there, the lead time modeling comes into play there. So all of these things start fitting so nicely together. The other one, which is a little bit of a smaller one, is for one of the smaller brands rather, is the stock rebalancing. So when stock is in a specific store, it's very easy then to understand where the demand is and where that stock needs to be moved for before the customer request the specific merchandise. So our whole aim is to get that customer satisfaction up, to get that customer experience, to get the customer to have really good experiences in store. And the worst thing that you can have is going into a store for a specific product and you find the ideal thing and you don't have the right size. So this whole project was focused around, and after allocations, is trying to get that balancing of stock right, to reduce the markdowns and to really deliver that customer experience that we want to provide. Other things like let's talk about customers specifically. So we're at the moment busy with a recommendation engine for customers, which is personalizing every single thing we provide to a customer, whether that's the merchandise we put in an email, whether it's the channel that we use, whether it's the time of day we're talking to a customer, time of week we're talking to a customer. It's really making everything very personal and specific to who you are as a person to satisfy that demand. And we believe that, well, we've actually started the early tracking on how this process works, and it's been very, very successful. So
wonderful.
I'm very excited to see what's going to come out of this in the longer term.
Oh, amazing. And then I guess the flip side of that is there any specific challenges that you'd like to mention that you can think of over the past year or so, or period of, I guess, being in the role and developing these things that's worth talking about?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges obviously is the adoption of the models. I think it is still a challenge. I think the other challenge is solving the right problems. You'll hear a lot about the companies, 80% of machine learning models and AI models doesn't get landed successfully. So I think it's solving the right questions or solving the right problems, but it's also measuring it afterwards. And that's something that we have of late put a lot of attention on, is how do you measure how successful you are? It's quite a difficult area always to do, because if you change everything, you can't measure before and after necessarily. So we've put a lot of work in that, and I think that's going to deliver a lot more. It's going to expose the value that we deliver to the business.
Expose more of the value that's being delivered to the business, 100%, because if you're able to very nicely, obviously, test it before and after, even small changes or small projects, and you're able to show the value, it becomes way more obvious.
Exactly, and you need to create that momentum in a business. So if you don't have the momentum, you deliver something and you wait, and you deliver something and you wait. Well, as soon as there's that momentum to get things implemented and the excitement of the value that it delivers, then you really go on that upward curve.
Yes.
So that's a big focus for us in the future. I can't right now think of any others.
Maybe what would be more? What do you believe is more of the unique experiences you've had working in a retailer, for example, versus working in terms of as a consultant, history as a consultant? So like more head of data analytics in a retail environment versus kind of being an analytics consultant within Principa.
Yeah, I think the beauty of being in a business is you follow through with your delivery. So you get the data, you build a model, you implement it, and you look at the results. Quite often in a consultancy, you develop something and you hand it over to the business for implementation, and often you lose touch with that completely.
Yes.
So it's really understanding the full circle on when you started and when you end, and what value you deliver. So I prefer the scenario. It gives a lot of grounding on things working and things that does not work.
That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot more depth to it. There's a lot more. Well, if you can see the whole thing end to end, you can also start making changes and adaptations. Yeah. Whereas if you're not involved in the whole project, it's like, cool, great. It's kind of what we thought or insights we gave, and
yes, exactly.
You don't get to dig a little bit deeper.
Exactly. And the beauty behind it really is formulating that strategy, because as a consultant, you work on the questions that people give you. In a business like ours, you build on the strategy of the businesses. So it's the full circle. It's not an isolated
specific
area. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe something else I can just mention is we've had a lot of debate in our area whether the data analytics team should be a central area because you've got so many brands, or whether it should be embedded in the brands.
Mm.
And I guess there's pros and cons to both of these. If it's a central space, you often get a little bit of bureaucracy. Things are slower to implement because there's a backlog that needs to be waited out. And on the other hand, if it's very embedded in the business, the problem is you lose an understanding of what good machine learning means. You lose that best practice of what a center of excellence could potentially mean. So we've opted for a combination of the two. So we've gone for a hub and spoke model. So our center of excellence is really focusing on the stats and the maths that goes into the machine learning and the AI, while we bring the businesses in as our partners to work on projects specifically. So equal responsibility and eventually benefit to both of these parties involved. But you don't have that embedded or central conversation anymore. It's really one team.
One team, 100%. Okay, so as the head of data analytics, one of the things that you do is you have to manage a team that eventually manages other teams inside the organization, such as lead data scientists or lead analytics people, but lead data engineers and things like that. How would you recommend, let's say there's somebody out there who's trying to figure out how they should be managing, they're maybe starting a unit and they want to manage their team. Is there any recommendations you would give to that person as to how is the best way to manage a data team?
Sure, that's a very difficult question. I think firstly, you have to put the right people in the right chairs. So getting the right leads is absolutely critical. Secondly, you need to create the right structure for the team. So best practice is not inherent in a new team. So you need to find it somewhere. You need to find a way to get the best practices in. We've opted to use external resources to bring it in, which is Spatialedge in this instance. But that's a very good way to start because you don't have to learn everything from scratch. And it is eventually all about the people. You've got a whole lot of smart people in seats. Can't micromanage, so give them a problem that they need to go and solve and give them the rope to go and solve that, or the bandwidth to go and solve that. And that's what worked really well in our area. But there's a safe space that they can come back to talk about it and brainstorm it and work it out. But at the end of the day, they need to feel responsibility for what they need to deliver. They need to be responsible for the solution they put on the table. And they also need to get the recognition for that, of course.
100%.
The challenges will always be there because as you grow, the demand grows exponentially. So managing that level of stress and demand that comes in continues to be challenging. And people that are extremely excited about the work, which is the type of people that we like to employ, they're not in there for the money. They're not in there for the growth in terms of levels. They're in there because they really enjoy the things they're doing. That's what they're passionate about. And that's the people that I think are the right people for the seats.
Yes.
But your disadvantage with these kind of people, they will overwork and they will spend weekends and evenings to expand on their current knowledge. And I think it's a good thing, but you also need to be very cautious and not getting them to go overboard.
Yeah, and then burnt out. No, 100%. No, that's wonderful. So basically, to summarize, getting the right people in the seats, outside advice can help, especially if you're stuck or don't know where to go, how to operate, and best practices. But essentially, it just boils down to getting, if you have the right people and the clear, and you provide them with the responsibility and the bandwidth to solve the problems. Absolutely. There you have it.
Exactly.
And you have a successful team.
Yeah, I think so that's the team lead. Building a support structure underneath is also very important so that people can share work, that they can do the code reviews, that they can have a buddy system that they work with to bounce certain things off. So that's important to create a culture that it's okay to make mistakes. As long as it's not productionized mistakes.
I'm a big fan of everything you just said. So I think maybe to put it a little bit into context, so the buddy system I'm a massive fan of because if you are the only person engaging with a client, and you've got a specific, even if, let's say you're brilliant, you're one of the most brilliant people in terms of doing this, you can only hear a certain amount of things coming at you at one point. You're trying to obviously respond and come up with a solution and figure out and keep all this stuff in your head. So there's going to be blind spots you're going to miss. As soon as you've got just a second person with you, they don't have to have all the responsibility that the person leading the conversation, leading the project needs to have. The second person's got alternative context, and now suddenly all they have to do is essentially review what this guy's doing, or you listen with a different ear and find and hear things that the other person hasn't been.
Exactly.
And just that two brains, and suddenly your output or your effort is a lot less in terms of getting that thing solved.
Exactly. You know, it's something that happened to me when I was a child. We all got math problems, and I was studying maths. And whenever I hit a point that I couldn't get any further, I went to my dad to try and ask advice. And as soon as I explained the problem to him, I understood what the answer is. And I think that's also important. You need people to explain things to, because often that helps you resolve the problem in your own head.
Yes.
So you need to create that kind of culture that people talk to each other and explain their problems and often find their own solutions. But that supporting structure that builds on the knowledge you actually already have.
It's actually two things there. It reminds me, there's this culture in software development world. We've got the rubber duck. Where is it? Okay, if you get stuck, you must explain it to the rubber duck.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, perfect. Yes. I should get a couple of rubber ducks.
That's the first part. But obviously, if you can have somebody also can give you feedback, and that's also worthwhile. And then I had a guy, a new intern, come to me the other day, and I was chatting to him, and I was asking him, what is the difference between now being at university and working here? And his first thing was, you guys don't fight in terms of knowledge. And what he meant with that was, in university, it's like kind of you're trying to be a little bit better than the other guy, or like it's your piece of knowledge that you're like debating and you're fighting about it, but also it's not sharing.
Yes.
You have to be right. It's like, okay, I'm okay with being wrong. Let's just together come up with a good solution, because the goal is not to build knowledge or be the cleverest. The goal is, well, how do we move the bottom line for the client?
Exactly.
That's it. So that was quite interesting.
Absolutely. I think one of the challenges, now that you open that up, one of the other challenges that I think is typically out there is, because we're all so excited about this new world, ChatGPT and everything else, people are very much focused on the technology, which is the wrong thing to focus on. You need to focus on the outcome. You need to focus on that problem that you want to solve with the customer. That needs to be the thing you want to solve. So I believe as a DNA area, you need to focus on the value you deliver to the business rather than implementing interesting tech, getting the latest and the greatest. And
you know, it's interesting that I've seen this time and again, it's almost a culture thing of, or maybe it's because of all the salespeople, but the thing there always seems to me that when you become the head of something, you kind of gravitate towards, okay, now I need to buy a bunch of tools because they're going to solve your problems, right? That's what it says on the ad.
Of course.
And then you buy it, and then you're like, cool, now what? Where's my solution? Why is it not solving my problems?
Where's the green button?
No, okay, that 100% agree, makes total sense.
We were always a very agile team, if you want to call it that, because our project arrived and, you know, you have to adapt and you have to just deliver at the end of the day.
There's business expectations, and they have a question that needs to be answered, and they need to answer it now because it's going to be 2 weeks from now.
Yes. I think this whole agile process has given us, actually, the one we implemented with Spatialedge has given us a lot of structure around agile, which we previously didn't have. And I think the process that we follow has been so good. Initially, there was a lot of people that was against it. And I think there's different definitions of agile. I think different people do it in different ways, but I think the way we do it at the moment is really working for the team, it's working for the business, and it's working for the value add that we have. So I think that's been very valuable.
Thank you. So actually expanding maybe on that one a little bit as well. Companies can butcher agile. I've seen that as well in the weirdest ways. But then I think, so maybe putting into context what you're saying now in terms of how we do agile, there's one of the things that we really focus on is also when you get back to the core of what it means. There's a lot of the principles where people kind of misinterpret it, such as, you talk to people over documenting things. And normally with the wording, it's you talk to them, but you should still, have some documentation. It's not do the one, not the other one.
Yes.
But so there's that kind of the principles to start with, but then it's the process of when a client comes in with a specific request, it's also the idea of taking that whole thing of, okay, there's a process, but taking a step back and understanding the request and seeing if there's any opportunity for, listen, this request is not going to be a single request. It's actually something that's a continuous request.
Yes.
So how do you then create a process around it, or a system or a dashboard or something that is not an issue ever in the future again, or at least as little as possible, or maybe it literally is, listen, somebody just needs to write a SQL query. We just need to get the results. It's really a once-off, one-time thing. How can we manage it within the process? And how can we move in that direction?
I think the danger of Agile is it sometimes becomes an excuse to carry on working because you never have deadlines, right?
Yes.
So I think what we're trying to do is not go that route. It's not the excuse of. It's really continuously reflecting on what value you're adding to the product and delivering it. And eventually
getting
feedback, but putting it in production, and then only do the next set of development. So you deliver continuously instead of just working continuously, if you like. And I think
I agree with that.
That's added significant value.
That's 100%. You can't try and build everything. I think that's the boiling the ocean strategy. So that is, I've got a bunch of features. I think all these features are going to be great. Let's just build it and then we deliver it.
Yes.
Only to find out that you've been wrong 90% of the time.
Yes.
So you've got the 20% that is the core. You get that solved. You got the 40% that then you learn the client still needs and requires, and that other 40% is maybe not necessary anymore. So you can move on and leave it be. So I guess that's quite valuable.
Exactly.
How would you measure success?
In the DNA space.
I guess the first one is just within the being in the data world, in the data analytics world.
I think as a DNA business, I think the success eventually is in the actual value you deliver to the business. So
hard numbers at the end of the day.
Hard numbers, it has to be. Without hard numbers, you're not going to convince anyone to really become data-driven with the data culture. Maybe after that, it becomes less important. But the first hurdle you've got to cross, you've got to prove value.
Got to prove
everything that you do.
My assumption is measuring success then would also be, look, we've contributed a total amount of X to the bottom line. And this is because at the end of the day, as a retailer, it's rands and cents. It's not much more than that. But then also there is the softer elements, but then those softer elements can be converted into rands and cents at the end of the day. Because I was trying to think, like, sure, there is also the more strategic, or the more we built out this to improve a certain level of time savings for a section of the company, but that time savings can eventually be translated to rands and cents as well. So you can always actually just get there.
Yes. So rands and cents are important, but it's also about your growth on top of the rands and cents. So if you build an ad hoc project that adds a lot of value as a once-off, that doesn't mean anything. So it needs to be repeatable value, if you like. So nothing that we build should ever be a once-off. It should be building on top of each other. And maybe over time, the amount of value that you add for that specific project is not that significant compared to the initial delivery, but it's building that continuous value delivery on top of the products.
What I love about that is if it's repeatable, or over time, the value is a lot bigger. So as time goes by, it pays a lot more dividends than a once-off project.
Exactly. So never focus on just the value, focus on the continuous value.
The continuous value. How has the industry changed since you kind of started and entered into it? And where do you think it is going?
I think there's a little bit of debate at the moment whether the industry will be dominated by outside solutions or inside solutions. I believe it's a mix of the two. we've gone down this philosophy that whatever needs to be developed, you should be able to implement in your own pipelines. So you have that full control at the end of the day, but it doesn't mean it excludes solutions from the outside. So for instance, ChatGPT is something you can build into your own system, or GPT-3 actually build into your own system and utilize it to improve whatever you're doing. But there's many views outside that says to the likes of Google that's got all the money in the world, they're not going to drive this whole process. I'm not of that view. I think you always need to own your own strategy, and you need to own your own business, and you need to drive your own success. But I think it's going to change significantly in the next couple of years. I think the technology from the sensors collecting data is going to explode. I think it's going to be every data point that could possibly be collected is going to be collected by someone. I think the technology on the cloud, we on Google Cloud Platform, and obviously there's Azure and AWS and many others, but I think that's been solved to some extent. So the processing power, the storage power is there. I think the AI and the ML is going to grow exponentially over the next couple of years, particularly in non-traditional areas such as NLP and which is already starting. I mean,
100%.
Yeah, and interpretation of pictures and video and that sort of thing is going to grow exponentially. How all of this fits together is going to be the key. So the people that can make it one solution are going to be successful. The people that concentrates on silos are going to have only one piece of the puzzle, which is they're probably going to lose it over time. So are we keeping up with the pace of this expansion of technology? I think everyone's trying to, and probably the hardest part of all is to always stay abreast of the newest and the greatest that's come out. Lots of competition between Google and Microsoft and AWS on who's going to bring the next big thing out. I think there's been a couple of ChatGPTs delivered from the various vendors of late. Every day there's a new announcement.
Yes.
And the challenge is what is important and what's not important, and distinguishing between that.
To pull into your world and to see how you can fit it and how it can be applicable and how it can be used.
But at the end of the day, it's all about the customer, and the company that can deliver that best value to the customer is going to be the winner.
100%. And then maybe then specifically now on DNA within Pepkor as to what is next for you guys? What is next in terms of where's the heading?
Yeah, so we've got a very nicely laid out strategy on where we believe this should be going. Don't necessarily want to share our whole strategy with you, but I think the essence for us is, again, that exponential growth. How do we build something that builds on top of each other and eventually optimize at a global, in our space, at a global scale to get the most out for all of the businesses. But the elements that will be peripheral that's going to become important is additional data points that you need to bring in. And I think that's the thing that still needs to be explored to a large extent, because that's very much dependent on the retailers and where they expand into. Digitization for me is just a form of getting more data, and
yes,
too many people won't agree, but yes, exactly.
It's streamlining the manual, removing the manual workflows, streamlining the workflows, and thereby you get a lot more data into the system. Precisely. That's in a good structure.
Precisely. I think people just need to be cautious on not trying to buy products that's very siloed and paint themselves into a corner. And that's what we try and do differently. We try to build an infrastructure that incorporates everything into one space. So you have that holistic view and you have that ability to optimize globally across the retail instead of just having siloed solutions that solves one problem at a time.
That actually reminds me a lot about the general shift worldwide from just a software-centric solution. And when you mention Zyl, it's a software system that you used or developed within, so for example, procurement or within a specific area in the business, to, we've got all this data in one place. Can't there be smaller apps data-centric solution where the software incorporates the data that's already available rather than living in its
Yes.
own isolated
Yes.
world, and therefore getting a lot more, giving a lot more value to the
Exactly.
organization as a whole.
Exactly. The more data you have, the more features you create. The more features you create, the more of the models can use the features. The better the models get, the better solutions get, and the better the customer experience gets. So that's where we sort of see this thing going to.
Massive.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I think the combination of customer and retail is becoming a lot closer than what it used to be. And I think all the silos are going to be broken down, and the solutions are going to be optimized at a global scale.
What are some of the things that you wish people knew more about data science and AI?
So I think a lot of people are caught in the hype of AI and ML, and it is exciting area. Don't get me wrong. I think what people do miss is that it is actually hard work still. Maybe in future it will be less so, but in really understanding the problems that you want to solve, that's absolutely critical. It's not about the tech. I've said this before. It's not about the algorithms. I think you should use AI and ML in areas where it's needed, not everywhere. I think you should not get captured by this absolute hype of what it could potentially be. And you should put the hard yards in to put the right foundations in place to get it to work. I think a lot of people think you can press the green button and it's going to solve the issue. It's not that easy.
No silver bullets.
No silver bullets. And I think the amount of work that goes into the data piece, the amount of work that goes into finding the right solution for that problem is often misunderstood. It's not something that's a quick thing to do. It's a thoughtful process.
And a difficult one. Gathering all that data, complex. There's a lot of people in the industry, I believe, would look up to you and your journey in terms of where you've come from and where you've gone and where you've actually ended up. And I think it's quite a exciting what you've been able to achieve and the level of impact you've been able to make. So is there any advice you would give for somebody who would want to one day be a head of data and analytics?
I think there's one answer I can give to that is be curious. Be curious continuously and don't get painted in a corner and just doing the same thing over and over day by day. I think this industry is changing so fast that you need to be on top of the latest technology. You need to be on top of the business strategy. You need to be thinking into the future because the pace of change has increased exponentially and tomorrow won't be the same as today. So curiosity drives that continuous development, and I think that's the ultimate key in being successful in this specific space.
Because that's the only way you'll be able to, curiosity is the only way you'll be able to keep up with what's happening. And the point is, if you're not keeping up with what's happening, then you can't be effective.
No.
Any advice you'd give to any aspiring data scientists who would like to enter the industry?
Oh, it's such a hard one because the industry, particularly overseas, have changed to a point that you have to be highly educated to be hired as a data scientist. Stellenbosch University is only this year delivering their first set of big data engineers. So it's a new industry for everyone. I think there's a lot of education that needs to be had by everyone. And I think for an aspiring data scientist, the key is to educate yourself continuously. There's so many open sources that's out there that can be utilized. Google publishes many. There's Kaggle competitions that you can do. There's many like Medium magazines that you can go and read up about. Everything is out there and everything is available. So the world is your oyster. You just need to find the right avenue to grow continuously and get on top of that knowledge.
Yes.
And master it and make it part of who you are and what you deliver.
Yes. That's such a good point. There's no more, I wouldn't say there's no barrier to entry when it comes to available resources.
Exactly.
Anything from basic stat principles and how that works up to how to build very complex models is literally freely available online.
Precisely.
I feel like the only barrier is kind of like time.
Yes. For sure.
And then probably like a decent internet connection, but that should pretty much be
Yeah.
not such a big issue
Exactly.
anymore.
I mean, there's problems being published in Kaggle that
Yes.
Walmart problems being published. The best people participate in the competitions, and the solutions are made public. So
That's 100% true. So if you're on a specific level, you can even go and challenge, and you do that challenge with that problem.
Yes.
Look how other people did it, learn from them, improve your own. Yeah, no, it's next level.
Precisely. And GitLab has got so many resources as
Yes.
well, where the code is there. Like it, don't like it, ChatGPT can give you advice on how to code eventually, so you can improve efficiencies. So I think there's just so many tools and things available that wasn't available before.
100%.
Yes, the only reason that you don't really grow in this space is because you either don't have time or you don't have the inclination to do so.
100%. I'm almost picturing when you said, when you were mentioning it wasn't like that in the past, I literally thought about, at the time, I mean, you had to look at books, and they could have
Go
been
to the library.
Yeah. And I mean, some books were probably good, but the majority were also very obscure or very difficult to understand, and you kind of need the expert to explain to you, and even then the expert might not be able to explain it as well. Where today, even if one person's not explaining it well, you can probably find another YouTube video of somebody else explaining it, and then it's like, oh, now I understand it. It's like the same concept. No, 100%. People in the industry, what are they kind of doing that you think they shouldn't be doing that's leading them down the wrong path?
One of the things is that people are focusing on the tech and not answering the problem. A lot of effort is being put into building the best and greatest machine learning models, but it's not solving the question at hand. So a lot of time needs to be spent in understanding what is that problem you want to solve. Probably 25 to 30% of time spent on the project would probably be invested in just discussing the problem with your client and the potential solution and design with your client, and testing whether the solution that you have in your mind is actually something that you can deliver at the end of the day, and that's usable and that's practical. I think there's a divide between the solution builder and
the end user. That's 100% a good point. That's like the co-creation with the client. Like the closer you are creating something with the client, the better chance of success you'll have across everything.
Yes. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first reason is obviously it will be the best possible solution that you can deliver if you work closely with the client. The second thing is the client will sell it as hard as you'll sell it because they'll believe in it.
They'll be the beneficiary of it. They'll know how to use it, and 100% they'll sell it a lot better.
Yes. You will always be the salesperson. You need the user to defend it.
That makes sense.
I think the third thing is setting the expectations right. It's not one model that's going to change your whole business. The best solution to implement first is actually one that's good enough. It's not the optimal. A lot of time people spend so much time in delivering this 98% accurate model. It takes them years, and by the time they implement, the problem has moved somewhere else or has moved on. So the first delivery is just good enough. After that, you focus on improvements. You just need to get that first one in, and then you improve over time. I think another one is just to create momentum. And you need to look at delivering often and regularly. You need to get that rhythm in place that says every 2 to 3 weeks you're delivering a couple of features, so the user can see this continuous improvement in product instead of this ultimate delivery a year down, 2 years down the line. If you're serious about your data, you will invest in your platform. I think that's absolutely critical. What we've invested in is GCP, the Google Cloud platform. Cloud is the only way to go if you really want to run big machine learning models and you've got big data. And then there's other elements to consider, like GitHub or GitLab for documenting your code, making sure that other people can pick it up very quickly if you lose people, version controls. There's Docker and Kubernetes for the virtualization of your products. We've got Google Cloud platform that we invest quite heavily in, and BigQuery specifically to put our databases in. Then we've got Vertex AI to run all our machine learning models in through the notebooks, Jupyter notebooks. We've got GitLab for version control. We've got Docker and Kubernetes for
running the models themselves.
That's right. And I think the final one is being able to market yourself and prove the value of the delivery at the highest level. So if you work in a business, it needs to be the expert that buys into it. And it needs to be presented in an understandable way, not a technical way. So anyone can understand the solution that you've implemented and that you put on the table.
Yeah, so that actually kind of reminds me again about the rands and cents. And the reason it does is because in the retail section, that's the thing that we'll understand.
Yes, indeed. Particularly the FD.
Yes. So in other words, presenting it, marketing and presenting it in the right way so people can understand it. I think maybe what that touches on is it's a difficult concept. It's a difficult thing to understand if you haven't really dealt with it or learned about it, or it's just not easy. It's conceptual. It's in the dark. It's running on a server that you don't even know how it works or what a server is. So how is it going to help me? Yes.
Business also needs to understand that it's not an easy thing to do. So that first solution won't be delivering the earth. It's small increments that makes this world tick. If you look at the things that Google has built, they haven't landed it as a big bang. It was incremental improvements over time.
Beta.
Yes. Business needs to understand that, because if they don't see the big jumps, they get demotivated and they think something is wrong. But it's the small increments that adds the value.